What's up everyone, and welcome back to my Echoes of Time channel. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button today. Let's get started. How life was in a medieval castle. Don't believe the many movies that show living in a medieval castle as a way to humiliate the rich. Living in a medieval castle was more than just eating, seeing justs, and having jesters make you laugh. Life in a castle would not have been very glamorous, even for the rich. The gloomy, depressing rooms were heated and lit by fires that were so smoky they made it hard to breathe. Life in a medieval castle was probably not very pleasant for most people, but the upper class did get to eat and drink some of the best foods and drinks of the time and had a little more privacy than the service class. Some people who lived in castles, on the other hand, did find comfort in chaste medieval sex because the living conditions were so confined and cold. Life in the Middle Ages wasn't very nice. The scent of castles was terrible. The smell in castles was awful, maybe because of the bench toilets or the fact that the lower classes didn't keep themselves clean. It didn't help that the bathrooms didn't have any privacy and that there was merely a cesspool underneath them for waste disposal. It wasn't always easy to clean yourself because the serving classes often had problems getting a bathtub and clean water. Also, people in the lower classes often got sick, and the average person living in a castle would have to use herbal treatments, if they had any, whereas the rich could easily buy the best medical care. A lot of the time, restrooms were just benches with holes in them. For many butts in the Middle Ages, you had to go pee on a long bench with a lot of holes in it. That was it. Your waste went down to a real cesspool below. There were no walls or privacy, so your friends and neighbors might undoubtedly see you doing your thing. Maybe it was nice to have someone to talk to while you were in the bathroom, and maybe people even talked to each other at the old cesspool. Still, gross. It's hard to say exactly how people felt about the procedure back then because there weren't any rules about privacy or cleanliness. There wasn't much privacy. From the outside, castles may look like strongholds, but the large floor plans on the inside made it hard for people to be alone, especially servants. The lord and lady of the house probably had separate chambers to get ready and take a bath, but everyone else who lived inside the castle walls had to sleep and eat together. People around might have helped keep the body warm because most of the castle was so dark and dismal. They might have found other ways to stay warm, but in the Middle Ages, the only way to bear children was to have sex with your spouse. This meant that it was wrong to even think bad things about your spouse. A normal castle can hold more than 100 people. Not that anyone really had a choice, but maybe living in a castle wouldn't have been for you if you don't like being among others. There were also a lot of servants who had to do castle work in addition to the families of lords and ladies who lived in each castle for generations. That many staff were needed to run a castle every day. There wasn't much privacy because of the big family and all the servants, which made living conditions feel cramped. It was easy to get alcohol and people always liked it. People in the Middle Ages liked to consume alcohol with their meals, like wine, beer, or ale. The wealthy in medieval times could buy wine, beer, and spirits, but the poor peasants were more likely to drink anything they could find. It's interesting to note that alcohol was pretty much a must-have at this period because the water was often dirty and not safe to drink. People still thought of it as a low-status drink, even though they knew boiling water could quickly clean it. The rich get what they want, and the rest of us get what's on sale in the liquor store, just like now. The day started when the sun came up. When it was dark outside, you could only see by firelight. Sunlight was important for getting things done around the castle. The little windows allowed in very little light, so many of the inside chores had to be done with that light. To give the workers in the castle as much light as possible, the work outside started at sunrise. The servants would often rise up before the sun so that they could light the fires in the kitchen and serve breakfast right away. In a medieval community, you could do 5 distinct jobs. If you were rich, you may be a member of the clergy, a nobility, or even a prince. People of the lower class can work as workers, artisans, or merchants. You had to get up with the sun every day since your duty was to run the town for everyone else, unless you were a noble or king. People bathed in wooden baths. People in the Middle Ages loved taking baths, even if it wasn't always easy to find a bathtub and clean water. People who lived in castles often had a wooden bathtub that could be transported from room to room so they could take bathe. People were thankful for the chance to clean themselves every now and then, even though it wasn't very private or clean. People in the Middle Ages probably didn't care as much about privacy and hygiene as we do now, but they probably didn't want to take a bath in front of their housemates. That doesn't have to be a terrible thing. It was really dark and freezing. People built castles out of stone, and most of the castles built in the Middle Ages were more for protection than for comfort. This led to the construction of huge stone fortifications with narrow windows. The castle's apartments were mostly quite gloomy and cold because the stone didn't let in much heat and the tiny windows let in very little sunlight. Think about how cold the rooms for the servants would have been. They would have been in the darkest, deepest parts of the castle. The servants would have been more likely to get sick because they lived in cold, wet places, and they wouldn't have had much protection from them. There was always a lot of noise and activity going on to get ready for festivals and feasts. The constant spectacle may have been a little boring for the lower classes who were doing all the labor to get ready for these big parties and feasts. Big, fancy feasts were common in medieval castles. You would often sit down to dine with friends, but if you were cooking, you would eat in the kitchen. Because you were so important, you were literally at the dinner table. Of course, the lord and lady would sit at the head of a big wooden table, and the staff would sit at the rear, where they couldn't be seen. What would it be like to cook delicious food and never get to taste it? While dinner was being served in the big hall, you sat according to your rank. Some things just don't seem to change. People throughout the Middle Ages sat according to how important they were, just like in modern high school cafeterias. The lord and lady, who sat at the head of the table, were served gourmet meals with strange flavors and treats. The less important guests would have sat at the colder, darker end of the long table, and their meals would have been far less showy. At least they can sit at the table. More than 85% of the people in the town worked outside the castle and were considered peasants. When it was time to eat, they had to take care of themselves and their families. Restrictions. The lord and lady were in command, even though they had a staff to do the work. Everyone who lived in the castle had something to do. They had to take care of the daily responsibilities of castle life in addition to their main job of making sure the lord, lady, and their many family members were fed and comfortable. The lord and lady took care of politics and made critical choices about the castle's territory and safety, so they clearly didn't have time to cook or fix anything. The flooring were covered with rushes and herbs to hide the lots of food grease and animal poop. As part of the never-ending fight to keep the castle clean and reasonably smell-free, reeds and herbs would be spread over the floors. The dry grass would help soak up and hold onto all the liquids and solids that came its way during the usual castle day. When the rushes were swept away and new ones put in their place, an ancient collection of beer, grease, fragments, bones, spittle, excrement of dogs and cats, and everything that is nasty would be revealed. The herbs helped to cover up the awful smell that came from all the dirt. The kitchen might have been on fire all the while. In the early Middle Ages, most kitchens were made of wood. But utilizing wood as the building material wasn't the ideal choice because kitchens without power have to prepare a lot of food over open fires. If your kitchen was like one of these kitchens in a medieval castle, it might have been on fire every day. Stone became the most popular building material, and hearths were built to keep the fire inside. You went to chapel on the reg. A good medieval castle had to have an on-site chapel where the lord and his family could go to morning mass. The castle is often made up of just the great hall and the chapel. Sometimes, an anteroom was built on either side of the chapel, which was sometimes built to create a T or cross that was perpendicular to the main hall's rectangular design. Some really fancy chapels were built to be 2 stories high so that the lord and his family could be above the rest of the people. All of the stairwells were built in a clockwise direction. When building medieval castles, most of the design choices were made for defense, including always building staircases in a clockwise direction. If an adversary attacked, they wouldn't be able to move their sword as much if they were on a staircase since the castle wall would block any right-handed warrior. On the other hand, the guards going down the stairs would have the benefit of full swing and could more easily take down their enemies. To keep people who aren't used to the precise footing from tripping, even the steps were different sizes.